Welcome to the Anti-Trafficking Response Academy by International Rescue Committee. Today, we will explore one of the most prevalent forms of human trafficking, sex trafficking. When we think of human trafficking, many of us picture women and girls being exploited for sexual purposes. And indeed, sex trafficking, the trafficking of people for sexual exploitation, remains the most widely recognized and most frequently discussed form of trafficking worldwide. Because it is reported more often than other forms, it is also the most documented and has long been a central focus of global anti-trafficking efforts. In this video, we will explore the definition of sex trafficking, the most common forms of sex trafficking, the scale of the issue, and what is the difference between sex trafficking and sex work. Sex trafficking, or trafficking for sexual exploitation, is a form of human trafficking. It is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of a person for the purpose of commercial sex. It involves the use of force, threats, deception, abuse of power, or other forms of coercion. And one key point: if the person is under 18, any involvement in commercial sex is legally considered trafficking, even if no force, fraud, or coercion is used. Sex trafficking takes many forms. This can be forced prostitution, where an individual is compelled to engage in commercial sex acts, either on the street or in residential settings, through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Forced pornography and performances in sexual venues, where people are forced to participate in the creation of pornographic material, or performances in sexual entertainment venues, such US exotic dance clubs. Another example can be cybersex trafficking, a growing trend where people are forced to perform in live-streamed shows involving coerced sex acts or rape, or engaged in the creation and sale of illicit sexual content or streaming of sexual abuse. Child sex trafficking includes trafficking for a commercial sexual exploitation of children, child prostitution, child pornography, child sex tourism or online sexual exploitation, and child sexual abuse material, CSAM. Sexual slavery is often the worst outcome or enduring condition of sex trafficking, in which a person is trafficked and then held in slavery-like circumstances. This is particularly prevalent in conflict settings, where armed groups, whether state, non-state, or terrorist actors, may abduct, coerce, or forcibly confine individuals for sexual abuse. Forced marriage is a form of sex trafficking when a person is made to marry without their free and full consent, and the marriage is then used to exploit them, for example, for sex. One way to better identify victims of sex trafficking is to understand the tactics traffickers use to exploit people. Traffickers often operate by promising potential victims a better life, a high-paying job, or a loving relationship. Research and data highlight the most common recruitment methods for sex trafficking. First, traffickers may employ the lover boy tactic, referred to in the United States as the Romeo pimp or boyfriend model method, by posing as loving partners and creating the illusion of a real relationship. After building trust and emotional dependence, they exploit this bond to coerce the victim into sexual exploitation. A trafficker may recruit individuals through trusted networks, such as family or friends. One tactic, sometimes called befriending, involves peer recruitment, particularly among young people, where victims are used to recruit others for sex trafficking. Sex trafficking can begin with deceptive job offers or misleading advertisements. Victims may be promised legitimate employment in sectors such as domestic work, modeling, hairstyling, or hospitality, but once they accept the offer, they are coerced, manipulated, or forced into sexual exploitation. A trafficker might pretend to be a supportive benefactor, offering financial aid, a better life, or educational opportunities. In sextortion, an individual is coerced or blackmailed using sexual images or videos, either shared voluntarily or created digitally, to obtain sexual factors or financial gain. The rise of the internet has significantly changed the landscape of recruitment. Traffickers use a wide array of digital platforms, including social media, classified ads, and online chat rooms and games, to find, groom, and control their victims. Traffickers employ a range of powerful methods to maintain control over victims of sexual exploitation. These can include constant psychological pressure, physical or sexual abuse, and direct threats to the victim or their loved ones. In some contexts, such as in parts of Nigeria, for example, traffickers may also use rituals or religious oaths to instill fear and enforce obedience. Control can be more subtle as well, including restricting access to money, limiting freedom of movement, isolating victims from social support, or withholding healthcare and other basic necessities. Increasingly, traffickers use digital tools to exert control, such as monitoring victims' online activity, threatening to share intimate images, or using social media to manipulate and intimidate them. Together, these tactics create an environment in which victims feel trapped, dependent, and unable to escape. What is the scale of sex trafficking? According to United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime data between 2021 and 2023, more victims of trafficking are now identified in labor trafficking, 41%, compared to 36% in sex trafficking. Yet sex trafficking, especially of women and girls, remains one of the most widespread and visible forms of trafficking worldwide. Many victims experience overlapping forms of abuse. For example, those trafficked for labor may also be sexually exploited, and vice versa, making it difficult to capture the full extent of the problem. Human trafficking often involves more than one form of abuse. For example, people trafficked for labor may also experience sexual exploitation or violence, with women and girls particularly at risk. IOM data reveals that almost 60% of labor trafficking victims experience other forms of abuse, including sexual abuse. UNODC case law also confirms this pattern, highlighting that exploitation is rarely limited to just one form. Many victims endure overlapping abuses at the same time. This is one of the reasons why data on trafficking are incomplete or inconsistent, as they are often recorded in different ways. Who is affected? Women and girls remain the majority of sex trafficking victims identified worldwide. Between 2020 and 2023, they accounted for 92% of all detected victims of sexual exploitation. However, men, boys, and LGBTQI+ individuals are also targeted and have been increasingly identified in recent years. This rise reflects greater awareness and improved detection of diverse victim profiles, as well as traffickers' adaptation to new markets and vulnerabilities, including online exploitation and demand targeting marginalized groups. Children have also been disproportionately affected. In 2022, the number of identified child trafficking victims increased by 31% compared to 2019, with most cases involving sexual exploitation. This surge is linked to the lasting impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, which heightened children's vulnerability by disrupting education and support systems, increasing online exposure, and deepening household poverty, all of which traffickers exploit to recruit and abuse minors. Like the trafficking of women, the trafficking of men and youth who identify outside the gender binary is also universal. Yet the sex trafficking of men, boys, and LGBTQI+ people remains largely invisible. Data is fragmented, underreported, and shaped by gendered assumptions that victims are female and perpetrators male. As a result, men, boys, and LGBTQI+ persons remain underdetected and undersupported in global efforts to address sex trafficking. Several barriers make it hard to see the true scale of sex trafficking of men, boys, and LGBTQI+ people. Gender norms and masculine stereotypes often obscure male and gender-diverse victims of trafficking. Many men and boys hesitate to report their abuse due to stigma, fear of not being believed, or the deep-rooted taboo around discussing sexual violence against males. Social expectations that boys and men should be self-reliant, strong, and resilient can further discourage them from seeking help or identifying as victims. Similarly, LGBTQI+ individuals may fear discrimination, outing, or homophobic responses from authorities and service providers. They also face heightened vulnerabilities to trafficking due to social marginalization, family rejection, and unequal access to protection and support services. As a result, male and LGBTQI+ victims are often underrepresented in official statistics, not necessarily because they are less frequently exploited, but because they are less likely to be identified, report their experiences, or receive recognition as victims within existing legal and support systems. Authorities may misidentify victims. Men, particularly with migration background and unaccompanied boys, are sometimes deported as irregular migrants or even criminalized instead of being recognized as victims. Service gaps also exist, as most trafficking-related services and legal frameworks are designed for female victims, leaving LGBTQI+ and male victims' needs unmet. structural legal frameworks can compound the risks faced by trafficking victims. In contexts where same-sex relationships are criminalized, LGBTQI+ individuals who have been trafficked may face arrest, detention, or separation from their families, not due to any offense they have committed, but as a consequence of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or the stigma attached to their victimization. Finally, data limitations obscure the scale of the problem. Research is limited, tools are often female-centric, and reporting systems are biased, all contributing to the invisibility of male, non-binary, and LGBTQI+ victims in global statistics. Who are the traffickers? While women and girls are disproportionately identified as victims of sex trafficking, perpetrators identified are most often men. However, recent studies show that the picture is different. Estimates suggest that 16 to 32% of traffickers in sex trafficking are women, and in some countries, women even make up the majority. Research also indicates that women are more likely to traffic victims for sex internationally rather than domestically. Data from the International Organization for Migration shows that victims of sex trafficking are most often recruited by people they know, intimate partners, family members, or friends, accounting for about 62% of cases. It is crucial to distinguish between sex work and sex trafficking, while recognizing the complexities around choice and consent. Sex work involves the exchange of sexual services for money or goods, and adults may consent to participate. However, this consent can be shaped by economic necessity, lack of alternatives, or survival pressures, meaning that not all sex work is a freely chosen career path. In many countries, sex work is legally recognized as a form of labor. By contrast, sex trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to exploit a person for profit. Victims do not freely consent, and their autonomy is systematically taken away. Sex trafficking is internationally recognized as a serious human rights violation and a criminal offense. The crime of sex trafficking has increasingly moved online, with traffickers exploiting social media, dating apps, and other digital platforms to recruit and groom victims. They often create the illusion of a romantic relationship or a promising opportunity, manipulating trust and emotional dependency to lure individuals into exploitation. One particularly disturbing trend is cybersex trafficking, in which victims are coerced to perform sexual acts for a paying audience via live streaming platforms. This form of abuse allows traffickers to reach clients globally, often in real time, and to exert control remotely, making it difficult for authorities to detect and intervene. The anonymity and accessibility of online platforms also make victims more vulnerable, as traffickers can pressure, monitor, and intimidate them digitally, compounding the psychological trauma and isolation experienced offline. Sex trafficking is a global crime affecting millions. It takes many forms, from forced prostitution to cybersex trafficking, and it thrives on exploitation, coercion, and inequality. Awareness is the first step in prevention and protection of victims. Learn more about human trafficking and its complexity and anti-trafficking efforts through our other educational videos and resources available on our website. Thank you for joining us in this crucial mission.